The stars outside the observation deck windows looked different today. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper knew it wasn't the celestial backdrop that had changed, but the perspective of humanity itself. 12 hours ago, they were just another potentially explorable species in the vast galactic catalog. Now, they were about to become something else entirely. The UN peacekeeping vessel diplomacy hummed with a controlled tension that only highly trained professionals could maintain. It-Tol, a marvel of engineering that blended stealth technology with diplomatic infrastructure, represented humanity's most advanced approach to first contact scenarios. Every system, from its quantum communication arrays to its adaptive hull plating, had been meticulously designed for this moment. Harper's fingers traced the edge of his data pad, feeling the microscopic texture of the adaptive interface. The device contained generations of diplomatic protocols, legal precedents, and strategic analyses that would make most alien civilizations tremble. He wasn't just a Marine. He was a carefully selected ambassador of human potential. Outside, the Kraxan fleet approached with a grandeur that spoke of millennia of unopposed conquest. Their ships were living monuments to technological superiority, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them, creating optical illusions that both mesmerized and intimidated. Each vessel was larger than entire human cities, with propulsion systems that could obliterate planetary defenses with a mere fraction of their power. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood beside Harper, her posture a perfect blend of military discipline and diplomatic grace. She represented a new breed of human leadership, multilingual, culturally adaptive, and strategically brilliant. Her dark eyes scanned the incoming fleet with a calm that would have impressed even the most stoic military strategists. "They're following standard protocol," she murmured, just loud enough for Harper to hear, exactly as our xenological intelligence predicted. Harper nodded. The intelligence teams had spent decades analyzing captured communication fragments, diplomatic logs, and historical records from civilizations previously encountered by the Kraxan Concordance. Every detail had been studied, every potential scenario war-gamed through quantum probability simulations. The communication request came precisely 2.7 standard minutes after the fleet entered optimal communication range. A mathematically perfect approach that spoke volumes about the Kraxan's procedural nature. Grand Arbiter Zixol's image materialized in the holographic communication space, a reptilian humanoid whose very presence radiated centuries of unchallenged authority. "Greetings, emerging species," the translation matrix rendered Zixol's clicks and resonant throat sounds into perfect English. "We represent the Galactic Concordance. Your system has been identified as a potential protectorate zone." Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, her movements calculated and deliberate. "Greetings, Grand Arbiter. I am Commander Elena Rodriguez of the United Nations Peacekeeping Fleet. We appreciate your communication and look forward to a comprehensive dialogue." The subtle emphasis on comprehensive dialogue was no accident. It was a diplomatic signal, a warning wrapped in professional courtesy. Harper watched the interaction with the precision of a sniper. His role wasn't just physical protection, but intellectual defense. Years of specialized training had prepared him for this exact moment. A Marine who was as comfortable deconstructing complex legal frameworks as he was handling advanced combat systems. The ship's internal systems began their subtle defensive protocols. Quantum encrypted communication firewalls activated. Adaptive camouflage systems prepared multiple response scenarios. Defensive energy matrices aligned themselves with mathematical precision. Grand Arbiter Zixol's multiple eyes, each capable of processing visual information across spectrums humans couldn't even perceive, studied the human representatives. Centuries of subjugating emerging civilizations had made the Kraxan experts at reading body language, cultural signals, and potential resistance markers. What they saw confused them. No fear, no submission, no reflexive aggression. Just calm, prepared, waiting. Harper allowed himself the slightest hint of a smile. The real conversation was about to begin. The diplomacy continued its steady approach, a silent promise of complexity that the Kraxan Concordance was only beginning to comprehend. The conference room aboard the Diplomacy was a masterpiece of adaptive design. Its walls shimmered with holographic potential, ready to transform at a moment's notice. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper stood near the primary projection zone, his marine training evident in every measured breath and calculated movement. Grand Arbiter Zexal's delegation settled into their seats, biomechanical chairs that adjusted to their complex physiology. Each Kraxan representative wore intricate communication nodes that translated not just language, but subtle emotional and cultural nuances. They expected another routine first contact. Humanity would present its meager technological achievements, and the Concordance would begin its standard assimilation protocols. They were monumentally wrong. Commander Elena Rodriguez initiated the presentation with a precision that would have impressed the most demanding military strategists. The room's holographic systems came alive, transforming the space into a living, breathing historical archive. Conflict resolution, a human journey, appeared in bold, translucent letters above a panoramic display of human history. The first images were brutal. Battlefields from World War II materialized, tanks rolling through decimated European landscapes, soldiers fighting in conditions that defied human endurance. Normandy's beaches flickered with raw, unfiltered footage of human sacrifice and determination. "We begin." Commander Rodriguez's voice was calm, almost clinical, by acknowledging our most painful chapters. The Kraxan delegation shifted uncomfortably. Their own historical records carefully sanitized conflicts, presenting a narrative of smooth, bloodless expansion. Humanity was doing the exact opposite, laying bare its most violent moments for critical examination. Images of international peace conferences followed. The United Nations headquarters in New York, diplomatic meetings that had prevented global conflicts, peacekeeping missions that demonstrated extraordinary restraint. Each image was a carefully chosen narrative thread, showing how humanity transformed its most destructive impulses into mechanisms of global cooperation. Jack Harper controlled the presentation's flow, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to anticipate his every movement. Years of specialized training had prepared him for this moment, a Marine who was as much a diplomatic weapon as a combat specialist. "Notice the progression," he interjected, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone dismantling a complex argument. "Each conflict taught us something. Each loss became a lesson in prevention." A series of legal documents began to overlay the historical imagery: international humanitarian laws, Geneva Conventions, complex diplomatic frameworks that had evolved over decades. The Kraxan found themselves drowning in a sea of legal complexity that made their own diplomatic protocols look like primitive sketches. Grand Arbiter Zexal's multiple eyes flickered rapidly, a sign of processing complexity that humans had learned to recognize as confusion. The standard subjugation script was falling apart, page by page. The presentation shifted to technological demonstrations, but these weren't typical weapon systems. Each display showed defensive technologies designed with unprecedented ethical considerations. Drone swarms capable of neutralizing communication systems without causing physical harm. Electromagnetic pulse generators that could disable technological threats while preserving infrastructure. Defensive algorithms that could predict and prevent conflict before it escalated. "Our technological development," Commander Rodriguez explained, "is guided by a fundamental principle: preservation, not destruction." The Kraxan delegation began to whisper among themselves, a breach of their typically rigid communication protocols. Their universal translators struggled to capture the nuanced implications of what they were witnessing. Jack Harper allowed himself a microscopic smile. They were off balance, exactly as planned. The final segment of the presentation was perhaps the most powerful: a comprehensive breakdown of every Concordance peacekeeping mission over the past millennium. Each intervention was methodically analyzed, its human rights implications dissected with surgical precision. Numbers, legal precedents, cultural impact assessments, nothing was left unexamined. The Kraxan found themselves not as conquerors, but as defendants in a trial of galactic ethics. Grand Arbiter Zexol's communication nodes began to emit a low, almost imperceptible vibration. The universal sign of profound professional discomfort. Humanity wasn't just presenting a defense. They were rewriting the entire concept of first contact. The demonstration was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same. The holographic display transformed, diving deeper into humanity's complex historical narrative. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper stood beside Commander Elena Rodriguez, their body language a carefully choreographed dance of professional unity. The first image materialized, a devastated European landscape from World War II. Broken buildings, scattered remnants of human lives interrupted. But unlike previous presentations that merely showed destruction, this display told a story of remarkable transformation. Our history is not a linear progression. Commander Rodriguez's voice carried a weight that transcended mere presentation. It is a spiral of learning, of constant reconstruction. Craxan delegates leaned forward, their sensory nodes working overtime to process the nuanced narrative unfolding before them. Grand Arbiter Zexol's multiple eyes flickered with an emotion approaching confusion, something rare for a species that prided itself on absolute cultural certainty. The presentation began to deconstruct humanity's most violent chapters. World War II wasn't just presented as a conflict, but as a profound turning point in human collective consciousness. Each battle, each moment of suffering became a catalyst for fundamental global changes. Holographic figures emerged, survivors, diplomats, ordinary people who transformed trauma into systemic change. A Jewish refugee who became an international human rights lawyer, a former child soldier who developed conflict resolution programs, a war correspondent who established humanitarian aid networks. Jack Harper's fingers manipulated the holographic interface with surgical precision. Every image, every narrative thread was a carefully selected piece of evidence. They weren't just showing history. They were dismantling the Craxan's understanding of cultural development. Observe the pattern, he interjected, his marine training evident in his methodical delivery. Each global trauma produced a corresponding global response. Conflict became the forge of our most advanced collaborative mechanisms. United Nations footage began to play. Peacekeeping missions that prioritized civilian protection. Diplomatic negotiations that prevented potential conflicts. Humanitarian aid programs that crossed traditional geopolitical boundaries. The Craxan delegation found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't a civilization that had simply survived its violent past. This was a species that had weaponized its understanding of conflict into a sophisticated system of global cooperation. Commander Rodriguez zoomed into specific historical moments. The Marshall Plan after World War II. The formation of international criminal courts. Global climate cooperation agreements. Each example demonstrated humanity's remarkable ability to transform destructive potential into collaborative solution building. We learned, she explained, that survival is not about individual triumph. It's about collective adaptation. Holographic data streams began to overlay the historical imagery, economic recovery models, educational exchange programs, scientific collaboration initiatives. Each visualization demonstrated how humanity converted potential conflict into productive interaction. Grand Arbiter Zexol's communication nodes began to emit a low, complex frequency, the Craxan equivalent of profound cognitive dissonance. Their entire galactic model of cultural interaction was being systematically dismantled. Jack Harper observed the delegation's reactions with the same intense focus he would apply to a complex combat scenario. Every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture was a data point. The Marine in him recognized this as an intellectual battlefield, where information was the most potent weapon. The presentation dove into humanity's most recent collaborative achievements: global pandemic response protocols, international scientific research networks, multilateral climate mitigation strategies. Each example demonstrated a civilization that had learned to view challenges as collective opportunities. Conflict is not our enemy. Commander Rodriguez's voice resonated with a quiet intensity. Conflict is our most powerful teacher. The Craxan delegates exchanged rapid, almost imperceptible glances. Their universal translators struggled to capture the nuanced philosophical implications of the human presentation. Holographic timelines began to show how human societies had transformed their most violent impulses. Legal frameworks that protected individual rights. Educational systems that emphasized empathy and critical thinking. Economic models that prioritized collective well-being. Jack Harper noticed the precise moment when the Craxan delegation's confidence began to fracture. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a subtle erosion, like watching a sophisticated structure slowly lose its fundamental support. They were witnessing a species that had turned its most profound challenges into its greatest strength. The demonstration of humanity's resilience was complete, and the galaxy would never look the same again. The conference room's holographic displays shifted with surgical precision, transforming into a showcase of human technological philosophy. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper stood at the center, his presence a living bridge between military discipline and scientific innovation. Commander Elena Rodriguez initiated the next phase of their demonstration. The first holographic projection materialized, a deceptively simple drone system that looked almost fragile compared to the massive Craxan weaponry. "Technology is not about power," she explained, her voice cutting through the alien delegate's preconceptions. "It's about problem-solving with minimal disruption." The drone began to demonstrate its capabilities. Unlike traditional weapon platforms, this system was a marvel of restrained engineering. Electromagnetic pulse generators could disable communication networks without causing physical destruction. Adaptive camouflage systems could neutralize threats through information control rather than violent intervention. Grand Arbiter Zixal's multiple eyes struggled to process the demonstration. Their understanding of technological development was based on escalation, each innovation a more powerful method of subjugation. Humanity presented something entirely different: technology as a precision instrument of preservation. Jack Harper controlled the presentation, each gesture revealing layers of strategic thinking. Holographic displays showed defensive systems that prioritized protection over destruction. Communication jamming technologies that could isolate threats without causing collateral damage. Adaptive response algorithms that predicted and prevented conflict before it could escalate. "Notice the core principle," Harper explained, his marine training evident in every carefully chosen word. "Our goal is never total elimination. It's controlled resolution." The Craxan delegation found themselves confronting a fundamental paradigm shift. These weren't just technological systems. They were philosophical statements about the nature of conflict and resolution. A series of environmental restoration technologies appeared next. Drone swarms that could replant forests. Atmospheric cleaning systems that could reverse ecological damage. Microengineering platforms capable of healing ecosystems with surgical precision. Commander Rodriguez zoomed into the technical specifications. Each system was a testament to human ingenuity, technologies designed not just to solve immediate problems, but to create long-term sustainable solutions. "We do not see technology as a weapon," she stated. "We see it as a collaborative tool for universal problem-solving." Holographic data streams began to overlay the technological demonstrations. Comparative analyses showed how human innovations prioritized adaptive solutions over raw destructive potential. Where Craxan technology sought to overpower, human technology sought to understand and resolve. The presentation delved into medical technologies that exemplify this approach. Nano-regenerative systems that could heal without invasive intervention. Adaptive prosthetics that restored functionality with unprecedented precision. Diagnostic technologies that could predict and prevent health challenges before they became critical. Jack Harper controlled the flow of information like a combat strategist. Each revelation was a carefully placed intellectual munition, designed to dismantle the Craxan's understanding of technological development. Defensive systems appeared next, technologies that could neutralize threats without causing permanent damage. Energy dissipation fields that could stop incoming projectiles. Adaptive barrier technologies that could protect without destroying. Communication disruption systems that could isolate threats without violent intervention. The Kraxan delegates began to communicate among themselves, their universal translators struggling to capture the philosophical implications of what they were witnessing. Our technological development, Commander Rodriguez explained, is guided by a fundamental principle of minimal intervention and maximum preservation. Holographic displays showed how human technologies could be rapidly adapted to multiple scenarios: climate mitigation platforms, disaster response systems, ecological restoration technologies. Each innovation demonstrated a species capable of viewing challenges as collaborative opportunities. Grand Arbiter Zexol's communication nodes began to emit a complex frequency, the closest the species could come to professional uncertainty. Jack Harper observed the delegation's reactions with the same intense focus he would apply to a complex combat scenario. Every micro-expression was a data point, every subtle shift in posture a potential insight into their cognitive processes. The technological demonstration reached its conclusion, but it was far more than a simple presentation of capabilities. It was a profound statement about humanity's approach to innovation, conflict, and universal cooperation. The Kraxan delegation sat in stunned silence. Their entire understanding of technological development was being systematically reconstructed. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of technological innovation, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The moment arrived when diplomacy transformed into something far more intricate. Grand Arbiter Zexol unleashed the Concordance's standard assimilation protocols, a legal framework that had systematically absorbed hundreds of civilizations across the galaxy. The document materialized in the holographic space, a massive, intricate legal construct spanning thousands of pages. It was a weapon disguised as bureaucracy, a method of cultural conquest that had worked flawlessly for millennia. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper stepped forward, his Marine training evident in every calculated movement. Commander Elena Rodriguez began to deconstruct the document with surgical precision. Each clause, each subparagraph became a battlefield of legal and ethical interpretation. The Kraxan delegation watched in growing disbelief as their seemingly impenetrable legal framework was systematically dismantled. Paragraph 7.3, subsection B. Rodriguez's voice cut through the conference room like a precision laser. Defines cultural integration as a unilateral process. We reject this fundamental premise. The universal translators worked overtime, capturing nuances that went far beyond simple language translation. This was more than a legal argument. It was a philosophical challenge to the very foundations of galactic governance. Jack Harper manipulated additional holographic displays, bringing up historical records of previous concordance interventions. Each civilization's absorption was methodically examined, economic structures destroyed, cultural frameworks dismantled, individual autonomy eliminated. Your protocols are not integration, Harper stated. They are systematic erasure. Grand Arbiter Zexol's communication nodes began to emit a low, complex frequency, the closest the species could come to professional panic. Rodriguez continued her systematic deconstruction. She demonstrated how each clause of the assimilation protocols violated fundamental principles of individual and collective human rights. International law, cultural preservation statutes, ethical frameworks developed through centuries of painful global learning. The Kraxan delegation found themselves in an unprecedented scenario. Their standard legal weapon was being transformed into evidence of their own systemic cultural violence. Holographic displays showed the fates of civilizations previously encountered by the Concordance, worlds stripped of their original cultural identities, economic systems replaced with standardized galactic protocols, individual autonomy reduced to bureaucratic classifications. We will not be another statistical entry in your expansion records. Commander Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of generations of human struggle. Jack Harper introduced additional evidence: economic impact assessments, cultural preservation studies, psychological analyses of forced cultural assimilation. Each document was a precision-guided intellectual munition. The Kraxan delegates began to communicate among themselves, their universal translators struggling to capture the full complexity of the human response. Grand Arbiter Zexel attempted to invoke additional legal clauses, standard protocols that had worked in hundreds of previous first contact scenarios. Each attempt was met with a comprehensive, legally airtight counterargument. The conference room had transformed into an intellectual battlefield where humanity's principles became both shield and sword. Holographic timelines appeared, showing the long-term consequences of forced cultural assimilation, economic stagnation, cultural trauma, systematic elimination of unique evolutionary adaptations. The Concordance's expansion was revealed not as a method of galactic advancement, but as a form of systemic cultural destruction. Commander Rodriguez delivered the final blow, a comprehensive legal challenge that would reverberate through galactic diplomatic circles. Not just a rejection of the assimilation protocols, but a formal investigation into the Concordance's historical interventions. Jack Harper observed the delegation's reactions with the precision of a combat strategist. Every micro-expression was a data point, every subtle shift in posture a potential insight into their cognitive processes. The Crexan delegation sat in stunned silence. Their standard first contact script had been completely dismantled. "We do not seek conflict," Rodriguez stated, her voice a perfect blend of professional courtesy and absolute determination. "We seek genuine dialogue, mutual understanding, collaborative coexistence." Grand Arbiter Zexel's communication nodes began to emit a frequency that universal translators struggled to interpret. It was somewhere between professional confusion and nascent respect. Humanity had just transformed the entire concept of first contact, not through military might, but through an unprecedented display of legal and ethical complexity. The cultural warfare was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The communication channels between the diplomacy and Earth erupted with a coordinated response that defied the Crexan's understanding of institutional behavior. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper watched as a global network of expertise assembled with unprecedented speed and precision. Major Rebecca Rodriguez stepped forward, representing the United Nations Extraterrestrial Diplomatic Corps. Her presentation was a masterpiece of institutional mobilization that left the Crexan delegation stunned. Live feeds began to stream from multiple global centers. Research universities recalibrating linguistic and communication protocols. Legal teams assembling comprehensive documentation. Scientific institutions preparing comprehensive cultural and technological assessments. "This is not an individual encounter," Major Rodriguez explained. "This is a collective human response." Holographic displays showed a network of collaboration that spanned continents. A Brazilian xenolinguist coordinated with a Japanese international law expert. An African climate scientist collaborated with a European communication specialist. A North American military strategist worked alongside a South Korean diplomatic analyst. Jack Harper observed the demonstration with the same intense focus he applied to combat scenarios. Each connection was a strategic link in a global information network. The Crexan delegation found themselves confronting something entirely unprecedented. This wasn't a hierarchical response. It was a fluid, adaptive system of collective intelligence that seemed to move with organic complexity. Major Rodriguez began to break down the human approach to first contact. Each global institution was preparing a specialized response. Universities were developing comprehensive cultural exchange frameworks. Legal teams were constructing international protection protocols. Scientific institutions were preparing comprehensive technological and biological assessment documents. Grand Arbiter Zexel's communication nodes began to emit a frequency that suggested profound cognitive dissonance. Their understanding of institutional behavior was being systematically dismantled. Holographic displays showed the depth of human preparedness. Linguistic adaptation teams were already developing communication protocols. Diplomatic corps were assembling comprehensive cultural preservation strategies. Economic analysts were preparing impact assessments that considered not just human interests, but potential galactic ecological and social implications. "We do not respond as a singular entity," Major Rodriguez explained. "We respond as a global collaborative system." The presentation revealed layers of institutional complexity. Emergency response networks, international scientific collaboration platforms, diplomatic communication channels that could activate within moments of first contact. Jack Harper controlled the flow of information with surgical precision. Each revelation was a carefully placed intellectual munition designed to challenge the Kraxen's understanding of institutional behavior. Live feeds showed global research centers recalibrating their approaches, space exploration teams developing new communication protocols, medical research institutions preparing comprehensive biological interaction frameworks, educational systems developing curriculum to understand potential extraterrestrial contact. The Kraxen delegates began to communicate among themselves, their universal translators struggling to capture the full complexity of the human response. Major Rodriguez introduced the next layer of their demonstration, a comprehensive breakdown of human institutional flexibility, how quickly global networks could reconfigure, how adaptive human communication and collaborative systems could be. Holographic timelines appeared, showing how human institutions had transformed through historical challenges, from global pandemic responses to climate change mitigation strategies. Each example demonstrated a species capable of rapid, collective adaptation. Grand Arbiter Zexal found themselves confronting a fundamental paradigm shift. This wasn't a civilization that could be easily categorized or controlled. This was a dynamic, fluid system of collective intelligence. Jack Harper observed the delegation's reactions with the precision of a combat strategist. Every micro-expression was a data point. Every subtle shift in posture a potential insight into their cognitive processes. The global response demonstration reached its conclusion, but it was far more than a simple presentation of institutional capabilities. It was a profound statement about humanity's approach to collective challenge and cooperation. We are not waiting. Major Rodriguez's final statement resonated through the conference room. We are preparing. We are adapting. We are ready. The Kraxen delegation sat in stunned silence. Their entire understanding of institutional response was being systematically reconstructed. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of first contact collaboration, and the galaxy would never be the same again. News of the encounter spread faster than light through galactic communication networks. Civilizations that had long been subjugated by the Kraxen concordance watched with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper had become more than a Marine. He was now a symbol of something far greater. The first ripples began in the most unexpected places. Communication networks that had been dormant for generations suddenly sparked to life. Subjugated worlds started sharing information, comparing notes on their encounters with the concordance. Commander Elena Rodriguez monitored the developing situation with calculated precision. Holographic displays tracked communication patterns, diplomatic exchanges, and subtle shifts in galactic power dynamics. We've done more than challenge the concordance, she murmured to Jack Harper. We've given hope a vector of transmission. Diplomatic channels erupted with activity. Worlds that had been silent for generations began to find their voices. Historical records of concordance interventions were pulled from carefully hidden archives. Each transmission was a tiny act of defiance, a small light pushing back against generations of cultural suppression. Jack Harper watched the developing scenario with the same intense focus he would apply to a complex combat situation. Every communication pattern was a data point. Every subtle shift in galactic information flow a potential strategic insight. The Kraxen's carefully maintained facade of benevolent governance began to crack. Civilizations previously thought to be completely assimilated started to reassert their cultural identities. Communication networks that had been tightly controlled began to show signs of unexpected resilience. Holographic displays tracked the spreading information. A mining colony in the Epsilon Quadrant shared historical documentation of its original culture. A research outpost revealed suppressed scientific discoveries. An agricultural world reconnected with its ancestral agricultural practices. Grand Arbiter Zexal found themselves fighting a war they had never anticipated. This wasn't a military conflict. It was an information insurgency. Commander Rodriguez began to coordinate a sophisticated information support network. Not direct intervention, but a carefully designed framework that would support emerging cultural expressions. Legal teams prepared documentation. Communication specialists developed support protocols. Cultural preservation experts assembled comprehensive preservation strategies. The galactic information landscape transformed. What had been a monolithic system of control became a dynamic, complex network of emerging voices. Jack Harper noticed the precise moment when the concordance's control began to truly fracture. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a subtle erosion, like watching a sophisticated structure slowly lose its fundamental support. Holographic timelines appeared, showing the rapid spread of information. Each transmission was a tiny act of cultural resistance, each shared memory a blow against systemic suppression. The Kraxan delegation's communication networks began to show signs of unprecedented stress. Their standard suppression protocols were failing against a type of resistance they had never encountered. Commander Rodriguez introduced the next layer of their strategy. Not direct confrontation, but a sophisticated framework of cultural and legal support. Documentation of historical injustices, legal frameworks for cultural restoration, communication platforms that would support emerging voices. Jack Harper controlled the flow of information with surgical precision. Each revelation was a carefully placed intellectual munition designed to challenge the concordance's understanding of cultural control. Diplomatic channels began to light up across multiple star systems. Worlds that had been isolated for generations found themselves part of a growing network of cultural restoration and mutual support. Grand Arbiter Zexal's communication nodes began to emit a frequency that suggested profound institutional panic. Their entire model of galactic governance was being systematically dismantled. The information spread wasn't just about resistance. It was about restoration. Civilizations began to reconnect with their historical narratives. Cultural practices long thought lost began to reemerge. Scientific discoveries suppressed for generations found new light. Jack Harper observed the developing scenario with the precision of a combat strategist. Every communication pattern was a potential strategic insight. Every emerging cultural expression a blow against systemic suppression. The galactic tremors reached a crescendo. What had begun as a single encounter was transforming the entire structure of galactic civilization. "We did not come to conquer." Commander Rodriguez's statement resonated through emerging communication networks. "We came to restore, to support, to reconnect." The Kraxan delegation sat in stunned silence. Their entire understanding of cultural control was being systematically reconstructed. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic information exchange, and the universe would never be the same again. The conference room aboard the Diplomacy fell into a profound silence. Staff Sergeant Jack Harper and Commander Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of a moment that would redefine galactic civilization. Grand Arbiter Zexal's delegation appeared transformed. They were no longer the confident conquerors who had entered this space. They were students confronting a fundamental reimagining of cultural interaction. "We have misunderstood the nature of advancement." Zexal finally spoke, the universal translators capturing a tone of genuine revelation. "Civilization is not about conquest. It is about connection." Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, her movements deliberate and measured. "Advancement is a collaborative journey, not a hierarchical imposition." Holographic displays began to show alternative models of galactic interaction. Cooperative research networks, cultural exchange platforms, multilateral problem-solving initiatives that prioritized mutual understanding over domination. Jack Harper observed the transformation with the precision of a combat strategist. Every subtle interaction was a data point, every moment of understanding a potential pathway to a new kind of galactic cooperation. The Kraxan delegation began to deconstruct their own historical protocols. Centuries of expansion strategies were being reevaluated in real time. What had once been seen as efficient cultural integration now appeared as systematic cultural destruction. "We did not come to defeat you," Commander Rodriguez explained. "We came to demonstrate an alternative." Holographic timelines appeared, showing potential collaborative futures. Scientific research shared across multiple civilizations. Cultural preservation initiatives. Economic models that prioritized mutual growth over extraction. Jack Harper controlled the flow of information with surgical precision. Each revelation was a carefully constructed bridge between fundamentally different ways of understanding collective progress. The conference room became more than a diplomatic space. It was a crucible of galactic reimagination. Grand Arbiter Zexol's communication nodes began to emit a frequency that suggested profound institutional transformation. Their entire understanding of civilizational development was being systematically reconstructed. Commander Rodriguez introduced the next layer of their proposal, not a demand for change, but an invitation to collaborative reimagination. Legal frameworks for mutual cultural preservation. Communication protocols that prioritized understanding over control. Economic models that recognized the value of diverse cultural expressions. The Crexan delegation found themselves confronting something entirely unprecedented. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an opportunity for fundamental institutional reimagination. Holographic displays showed potential collaborative scenarios, joint scientific research initiatives, cultural exchange programs, multilateral problem-solving platforms that could address challenges facing multiple civilizations. Jack Harper watched the developing scenario with the same intense focus he applied to the most complex combat situations. Every interaction was a potential pathway to a new kind of galactic cooperation. "We are not asking you to change overnight," Commander Rodriguez explained. "We are offering a different perspective, a collaborative approach to civilizational development." The Crexan delegates began to communicate among themselves, their universal translators struggling to capture the full complexity of the human proposal. Diplomatic channels around the galaxy began to light up. Other civilizations watched this encounter with a mixture of hope and anticipation. What had begun as a first contact scenario was transforming into something far more profound. Grand Arbiter Zexol made a decision that would reverberate through galactic history. "We wish to learn," the alien leader stated, "not to conquer, not to control, but to understand." Jack Harper noticed the precise moment when institutional transformation became possible. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a subtle opening, like watching a sophisticated structure slowly reveal its most fundamental potential. The proposal wasn't about immediate change. It was about creating frameworks for ongoing dialogue, cultural preservation mechanisms, collaborative research initiatives, communication platforms that could bridge fundamentally different ways of understanding collective existence. Commander Rodriguez presented the final layer of their approach, a comprehensive framework for ongoing dialogue. Not a treaty, but an invitation to continuous collaborative reimagination. The Crexan delegation sat in a state of profound recalibration. Their entire understanding of civilizational interaction was being systematically reconstructed. "We do not seek to replace your systems," Jack Harper spoke, his Marine training evident in every carefully chosen word. "We seek to expand them, to show what's possible when civilizations choose connection over conquest." The conference room became a microcosm of a potential future, a future where diversity was not a threat, but the most profound source of collective strength. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic interaction, and the universe would never be the same again.